Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are going to start our webinar today. My name is Serdar Yilmaz, and together with Jamie Boex, I lead the Public Sector Alliance. Before we jump into today's program, let me say a few words about the Alliance, especially today marks the 5th round of year-round long global webinar series on decentralization and localization in countries around the world. Last year, September and December, we had 2 webinars on decentralization in Asia and Africa. And earlier this year, we had the Middle East and North Africa, as well as Latin America regions webinars. Today's webinar is organized by Local Public Sector Alliance together with a number of global partners, including World Bank, UNDP, UNCDF, USAID, Network of Associations of Local Authorities of Southeast Europe, and others. The Local Public Sector Alliance is a global alliance of advocates for more inclusive and efficient decentralization and localization. The Alliance and its website, decentralization.net, were established as a platform for knowledge sharing on topics related to decentralization and localization. And we hope to bring together policy practitioners, scholars, government officials, and civil society organizations from around the world interested in achieving a more inclusive and responsive and efficient public sector. As part of this wider aim, the objective of the current global webinar series is to elevate the debate on decentralization and localization around the world. In doing so, we don't want to promote a single view or a single approach to decentralization. Instead, we understand decentralization and localization as a means to an end, for example, better services or more inclusive society, not as a goal in itself. This means we are not only interested in understanding the state of decentralization in different parts of the world today, but also want to understand the question of why. What are the political economic forces that drive decentralization reforms or the lack thereof? Another area of interest for our community is to understand opportunities for stakeholders, whether government officials, development partners, researchers, or civil society organizations, to leverage decentralization or localization to champion or co-create a more inclusive and efficient public sector. Since the Local Public Sector Alliance aims to become an alliance of the community of practice, for the community of practice, and by the community of practice, we count on you to become an active part of the Alliance. Please visit our website, decentralization.net, register for our newsletter so we can keep you posted on future events. Also, please contribute to the website by sharing a blog about decentralization and local governance in your country or your research on a topic. Or maybe you can even co-host a webinar in the future together with us. In any case, we very much appreciate everyone joining us today. On behalf of the Public Sector Alliance, I would like to thank the panelists today for willingness to be part of today's webinar. Today, our webinar was supposed to be moderated by Glenn Wright, who is based in Kiev, Ukraine, but unfortunately, it seems like he is having, together with one of our participants, Sergey, having problems. Sergey Sulukai, they're having internet problems. So I'll go ahead and moderate session on behalf of Glenn. Before the session starts, let me cover a couple of housekeeping items. First, I want to let everyone know that this event is recorded. So video highlights from the webinar will be available on our website after the session. It should be noted that all presenters and panelists are speaking in their personal capacity, not necessarily representing their institutions. Second, the webinar version of Zoom allows participants to ask questions using the Q&A feature. So if you have any questions to panelists, please use this feature. We would be opening the chat session during the discussions. And we have a lot of exciting content to cover over the next 90 minutes. In order to use our time as efficiently as possible, we will ask the panelists to share their presentations, after which the discussants will make their remarks. And please use the Q&A feature to submit questions throughout the session. And we also have English-Russian translation today. Please use the interpreter button on your screen to select the Russian language if you feel like it. With those introductory remarks, let me present you our first speaker, Pavel Svenevich. Pavel is a professor at the Wroclaw University of Environmental and Life Sciences. He's going to set the stage with his presentation for an overview of territorial reforms in decentralization. Pavel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar. Let me share the screen first. Okay, that should work at the moment. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening to everyone, regardless which time zone you are in. Well, in my presentation, I will try to concentrate on two things. First, review territorial reforms, mostly territorial amalgamation reforms in Eastern Europe during last more or less 20 years and during 21st century. And second, in the second part, I want to discuss the main conclusions of academic research on impacts on results of territorial reforms. Well, specificity of Eastern Europe is that while typical territorial reforms are amalgamation reforms, in Eastern Europe, especially in the last decade of 20th century, it means in the first decade after the big political turnover in the region, we had several bottom-up reforms which were going in opposite direction. I mean territorial fragmentation or splits or divorces of municipalities. In this decade, during that decade, there were several thousands cases of such splits in Eastern Europe. Croatia was perhaps the most extreme case because during that period, number of municipalities increased more than 5 times, from just over 100 to 556. But also there were numerous cases of municipal divorces in several other countries of the region: Bosnia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Macedonia, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Ukraine. Plus some less numerous cases, individual cases of municipal splits in some other countries. Well, this pace of territorial fragmentation definitely slowed down in the first decade of 21st century, but there were still several hundred cases of municipal splits in the first decade, and almost disappeared in the last decade, 2010, 2015. 19. Well, of course, I have no time to discuss the motives and reasons of those splits, but what is important to note is that legal regulations have been evolving in that respect, from neutral, which sort of allowed relatively easily to divorce municipality towards more and more tight rules, limiting number of splits. But 21st century in the whole Europe was a revival of municipal amalgamation reforms. So merging municipalities into larger units. And during first 2 decades, we had such reforms in at least 19 European countries. And it includes several countries of Eastern Europe. If we try to go in a chronological order, you have amalgamation reform in North Macedonia in 2004, which reduced number of municipalities from 123 to 84, and which helped to finish the civic war or to settle relationship between Macedonian and Macedonians, ethnic Macedonians and Albanian minority in Macedonia. Then you had several other, Georgia in 2006, Latvia in 2008, 2009 with second stage, in 2021, so altogether reducing number of municipalities from over 500 to just 42. Armenia started in 2015 and the reform has not finished yet. Albania in 2014-15, Estonia, and quite recently Ukraine, which had over 10,000, almost 11,000 basic level local governments a decade ago, and which decided to implement quite very interesting territorial reform from 2015. The first stage of this reform, 2015 to 2019, was voluntary one. I mean, there were strong incentives for local governments to amalgamate, but it was not compulsory. And only in 2020, the reform was completed with a compulsory phase for those municipalities which have not decided to join their neighbors before. And as a result, number of municipalities or basic local governments reduced from over 10,000 to less than 1,500. Here are the figures which illustrate how size distribution of sizes of local governments has changed. I am not before and after the reform. I am not going to discuss this at the moment, but I understand the presentation will be available for you, so you may check figures for the individual countries. Here are the remaining of 7 countries of Eastern Europe which have undergone such territorial reforms in 21st century. I should add that there are some more countries, including Moldova, which complement the similar reforms in the future. However, the level of territorial fragmentation is still very different. So on the one extreme, you have countries like Georgia, Albania, Lithuania, in which most of local governments have over 20,000 citizens, and there are only very few with a lower number. But on the other extreme, you have Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, which have still very fragmented territorial systems, with several local governments having less than 1,000, and even several much smaller, having even below 100 residents. So why territorial reforms were implemented? Or in other words, what were the promises of promoters, of politicians and experts who advocated for amalgamated reforms? To simplify a bit, we may say that there were three major promises. One is that larger local governments would have larger capacity to provide wider scope of functions, so it would enable decentralization, or passing responsibility for more services and giving more local autonomy to local governments. So it was the first promise. Second, that due to economy of scale, you will have cheaper administration, so spending per capita for administration would be lower, and also unit costs of service provision would be lower. And the third promise was related to quality of services. So it was a promise of better quality of services in larger local governments, especially due to more professional management. In a larger local governments, you may have more employees of local governments, so they may specialize, they may be better trained, and they may offer a better quality of services. In a moment, we will discuss to what extent those promises were really met by actual outcomes of the reforms. But first of the promise was that territorial reform, amalgamation reform, would not stand alone, but it would allow coupling with other reforms. So, for example, passing more functions, passing more competences, giving more autonomy to local governments. And indeed, if we look at real situation, in several cases in Eastern Europe, in case of Albania, Armenia, Estonia, North Macedonia, and Ukraine, it really happened. I mean, shortly after the reform, or in parallel with the reform, some new competences were passed to local governments. In some cases, it was a marginal, a very small change, like in Albania or Armenia. In some cases, like in North Macedonia or in Ukraine, the change was more substantial. But there are also some cases, Georgia and Latvia are good examples, in which, in spite of the promise of more decentralization, nothing happened in this respect after amalgamation reform. Well, in some countries, but not really in Eastern Europe, it was more in Nordic countries or in Netherlands, there was the opposite order. First, decentralization, functional decentralization, and then they realized that local governments are too small to deal with all of those functions. So a territorial reform was like an adjustment to earlier passing of additional functions. Okay. But, well, what science, what academic studies may say about results of territorial reforms. Let me start that during last decade, there was a growing number of studies of territorial reforms. We found over 200 academic papers indexed in Scopus database about territorial reforms, and over 50% of them were about European territorial reforms. And well, I will not go into details. I don't have time for this, but there were new methodological tools worked out for this research, which give us more certainty that we can really trace the causal relationship between amalgamation reform and certain impacts. So when I discuss what these academic studies have discovered, I will distinguish between two dimensions. What has been the impact on economic performance of local governments, including financial management, costs, and quality of services, and what has been the impact on democratic performance, on local democracy. So let me briefly summarize the finding. As regards economic impacts, actually the only clear finding is that we have saving on administrative costs. Indeed, amalgamation brings economy of scale effect to spending on administration. That was confirmed by several studies in several countries. But in case of costs of other services, the results are less clear, and they depend on the country, on sector, on methodology of research. So there is no univocal conclusion in this respect. If we take into account quality of services, well, I am afraid, again, results are inconclusive, although most of results offer some support to the idea that larger local governments are able to provide better quality services. However, there are exceptions to this rule, so this rule is not a very strong one. So in general, it is a quotation from one of meta-analysis of studies in this respect. In general, the survey of the literature recommends caution regarding the expectations that amalgamation reforms, and not the unbridled optimism we often see in consultants and governmental reports. In other words, the frequent promises made by policymakers arguing for territorial amalgamation reforms can hardly be characterized as evidence-based policies. But I should add that most of European evidences are based on Scandinavian studies, especially from Denmark, a bit less from Sweden, Finland. Also, there are some studies from Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, while Central and Eastern European reforms are heavily understudied. There are some single studies from Poland, but not a serious methodologically advanced studies of results of reforms in other countries of the region. As regards impacts on democracy, so I am coming to the end of the presentation, available studies, mostly from Western Europe, plus single study from Poland, suggest negative impact of amalgamations on local electoral turnouts. So voters become less interested in local elections, but also negative impact on trust towards politicians, a negative impact on the sense of territorial attachment to local government unit, and negative impact on the willingness to participate in local public affairs. But, well, the most often are studies of electoral turnout because they are the easiest, relatively the easiest to be conducted. But on the other hand, there is a clear result that amalgamation brings greater electoral competition in larger governments. So if we believe that electoral competition is part of an essence of democratic process, then amalgamation brings also some positive consequences for the local democracy, not only those negative side effects which I mentioned a minute below. However, the topic of the impact of territorial amalgamations on local democracy still requires a more systematic summary of the existing evidences, but it seems unlikely that they could overturn this mainly negative picture which I drawn in the first item on this slide. To complicate the picture even more, very recently, in this year, the new Danish study has been published, which suggested that perhaps this negative impact on trust, on participation, negative impact on local democracy might be not last longing, might be just relatively short or mid-time effect after the reform, lasting like 8-10 years, but not longer. So once again, I am afraid professors often say this, we do not know exactly. There are still many issues to study. To conclude, not all aspects of the consequences of territorial reforms have been studied in academic researches with similar intensity, so our knowledge is still partial. And more important, perhaps importantly for this webinar, is that availability of studies is very uneven for individual countries. Reform in Denmark and to lesser extent Finland and Sweden have been very intensively covered. There are also several studies on reforms in Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, a part of Europe, also in Canada, United States, Australia, Japan, New Zealand. But for other countries, especially for Central and for Eastern Europe, we do not have many studies which would give us the certain results and conclusions. But to sum up, academic studies show that academics seem to be much more skeptical about the effects of territorial reforms as compared to numerous politicians and decision makers. So some of the promises which I quoted at the beginning of my presentation are too far going or are too optimistic. This is not to say, I don't want to say that territorial amalgamation is not a good idea, but the actual picture of arguments pro and con is far from black and white and has many more nuances than usually presented by the proponents of territorial reforms. So we should really think about what we expect, what are the most important things we want to change, and make the decision on an individual basis, having in mind that there will be both positive and negative effects. So experiences of other countries are worth to be analyzed, but there is no ideal model to follow which would fit local challenges. So every country has to make its own decision and its own way to go. Thank you very much for your attention. I probably spoke a bit too long. I am sorry for this, but I shut up now and give floor to others.
Thank you, Pavel. I would add Turkey to your list as well. Turkey has gone through a forced amalgamation in 2012 and reduced the number of municipalities by half. And it's extensively studied. Unfortunately, it's studied in the Turkish literature, not in English or any other foreign. That speaks probably to the drift that the country is experiencing towards east, not necessarily towards west. I want to invite Sergey right now. I see that he's managed to join us, so I don't want to miss the opportunity to listen the experience of Ukraine, just in case if something happens and he loses his connection. So Sergey Sulukai is a professor of economics at the Taras Shevchenko University of Kiev, and Sergey is going to talk to us about the reforms, administrative territorial reform in Ukraine. Sergey, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pavel, for your introduction to our topic, and thank you for you praised Ukraine in some extent. But actually, as you told, the academical view on process which we experience are not so optimistic. So I share your opinion in this case, and it relates to Ukraine too. So let me open my presentation. Okay, so the topic which I'd like to turn your attention is administrative territorial reform in Ukraine, amalgamation and local government budgets. So we'd like to explain in what way amalgamation reform affected local finance. And this study was undertaken by me and Glenn Wright. So first of all, I'd like to say, just a second, that the reform which we analyzed was not the first one. First attempt was in 2005 and it failed. It came not to real amalgamation. The decentralization process involved amalgamation in our recent reform, and it started from 2015 following the revolution of dignity and despite of Russian aggression. Actually, it was told by Pavel that we had over 10,000 small governments, and it's interesting that average size of each government was around 500 inhabitants. So, and this shows that amalgamation reform was very topical for Ukraine. Actually, decentralization policy in Ukraine was based on three pillars. First one, this is amalgamation, voluntary amalgamation. Second one, fostering inter-municipal cooperation. And third one, enhancing local fiscal resources. So these three pillars are very important, but the most important is the first one, amalgamation. Actually, okay, here you see what does happen in result of amalgamation. So after amalgamation, we started with around 10,000 and we ended up with around 1.5 thousand amalgamation. And you also see a very steep increase of number of amalgamated units in 2019. One can say why. The answer is that voluntary amalgamation has exhausted its potential and the government mandated amalgamation of territorial units. And in this way, we finalized our reform. So, in result, we have new structure of local governments, amalgamated one, and according to population criteria, the quite small governments with around 5,000 people, accounting for 37%, bigger one up to 10,000 people, accounting for 32%. The average number of merged units was 4.6. It means that, of course, there were situations when one unit was composed of 3 units, but in most cases it's around 5. But actually there was not much cases when the number of merged units was bigger than 7. The reform, amalgamation reform, was supported by changing in financial resources of local governments. The newly established amalgamated units became entitled to some more extensive fiscal resources in comparison to previous time. First, they received 60% of personal income tax income, then some other levies, excise tax, ecological levies, 100% of communal enterprise income tax, and so on. And this small business tax, also 100% were assigned to to new amalgamated territorial units. So, and this created a situation when they achieved quite more extensive financial resources in comparison to previous time. And we decided to analyze how this new situation with amalgamation and new fiscal resources affected actually their finance. And in result, we analyzed around 900 amalgamated units for year 2019 from database offered by ULEAD project. This is European project operated in Ukraine. And at that time, we saw that the composition of newly established territorial units was as follows. So 288 less than 5,000 people, up to 10,000 people, 268, and quite big units with more than 15,000 people, only 95. We also analyze some cities of regional significance in order to make comparison. So, and we try to analyze correlation of popular size to per capita fiscal resources based on this data. What conclusions or what did we receive? That only 30% of amalgamated territorial units, which are quite small, had about average per capita revenues. So it means that almost all of them receive not so much revenues in comparison to those in the same population group. 10% of territorial units in the group of with 5,000, 10,000 population have only 10% of them have above average per capita revenues. And if we try to analyze relation between revenue, per capita revenue, and size, it was observed the following one. It appeared, it was expected to have some positive correlation, but actually this positive correlation was not very significant for territorial units less than 5,000 population group, and it appeared even negative for the group of 5,000, 10,000 population. So it's quite disappointing result, I would say. And what about the other groups? So some positive results correlations we found for territorial communities with population between 10,000 and 15,000, and strong positive relation we found for cities of regional significance. In this situation, so after analyzing all this, we can conclude that size does not matter concerning fiscal resources which receive the territorial units, but the theory says us the opposite. The increasing size of territorial units must be reflected in increasing incomes in per capita terms. So in Ukraine, it was not the case for most territorial units, and we should think about the reason. Why is it so? We also conducted follow-up research, which was dedicated to newly established territorial units, but for some time period, we selected many, around 70 amalgamated territorial units and tracked what has happened to them within this period of amalgamation. And our interest was to see whether they increased their incomes and how they spend their revenues. In result, I would shorten my presentation because I see that it does not want to move fast. So in result, what do we have? We have situation that an increase in size is not supported by increase in revenues. It was the same as before. Then we try to understand whether the local governments used the revenues they received, so because they actually received bigger revenues. So how did they use them? So whether they have better structure of their expenditures. And one of the most important indicator is the cost of administration in local revenues. And it appeared that this measure, cost of administration, did not change significantly. It remained stable, and in many cases, it has increased. And another important issue was to what extent the local governments, being amalgamated, became more financially independent, local autonomy. And the important indicator of financial autonomy, it could be share of donations in local government budget. It appeared that this share of donation did not diminish, but became even bigger, especially in the regions, but because we analyzed 4 regions of Ukraine, especially in regions with dominating rural population. So it means that local governments in Ukraine after amalgamation became not more fiscally autonomous. In result of our study, both studies, we came to some conclusions concerning results of amalgamation reform. Actually, from theoretical point of view, from political point of view, it could be evaluated positively, but concerning expectations, as Pavel told us, it was disappointing because we do not see more active, more efficient use of public finance at the local level. We do not see that increased, bigger local units have possibility to attract more financial resources. And this all tell us that we should continue reforming and try to support amalgamation reform with some other reforms, especially dedicated to increasing local fiscal autonomy. And of course, all these reforms must be continued, and only after the Russian aggression will be ended and Ukraine will restore its territorial integrity. Because, you know, after all these events, many amalgamated territorial unions has been fully destroyed, both in economical, political, social, and so on sense. And we will need to restore all of them, and it will need huge support and huge efforts from Ukraine and international community. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry for delays in transmitting data.
Thank you, Sergey. I think we understand the constraints. We need to speed up our presentations a little bit. We are behind time. So I want to move to Albania, and I want to turn to Merita to make her presentation on navigating territorial, administrative, and governance reforms in Albania. Merita Tosca is an economic development and finance expert with the co-plan of Albania. Merita, floor is yours.
Hello to everybody. A good afternoon or good morning, depending on the time zone you are. Now I'm sharing my screen, and please just tell me if it's okay. Do you see me?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Perfect. Go ahead, please.
Okay, very good. Actually, the presentation is quite a bit long, but I'll try to cut whenever I can, given the new information presentation from the previous presenters, which I highly appreciated. Thank you very much for inviting me. And together with Anila, we have set up a presentation regarding territorial, administrative, and governance reforms going on in Albania. Actually, we'll talk about two main topics. We'll start with territorial reforms, and then we'll see whether these reforms, how have they impacted financial outcomes in terms of revenues, autonomy, and expenses in the case of the Albanian municipalities. We'll talk about local governance, and here in Albania we have two levels, but all the data that we present here are related only to municipalities. Actually, it has been a discontinuous process since the 90s, and it has been a priority with a high priority in the political agenda, which has triggered always this kind of reforms here in Albania. We are amidst a discussion for a third momentum here in 2022, 6 months before the next elections at the local level here in Albania. When I say discontinuously, is that because I want to relate to the fact that the reforming process usually has been undertaken each time as started from the beginning, and not as a continuation of the previous one to improve where the results has not been what have been expected, or to adjust what was done wrong. And the process of decentralization actually has progressed not at the same pace in all its dimensions. Actually, the political administrative ones have progressed faster than the market, financial and fiscal dimension of decentralization. The reforming process has been broadly criticized, and it was evident, especially after the natural disaster situation that the country underwent. Especially, we had 2 consecutive earthquakes, devastating earthquakes in late 19, and the pandemic of COVID, which was a common shock for all the world. In Albania, we have a symmetric decentralization model where municipalities are equally responsible for more than 41 functions and competencies, while the resources available for the exercising of these functions are not are assets not to be sufficient and not adequate to exert or to exercise all of these functions. In this slide, I've tried to summarize all what has happened in terms of territorial organization of the country, and we can identify 3 main waves. The first one started in the beginning of the 90s, where as a result of the amalgamation process and territorial reorganization, we had about 44 municipalities and 313 communes. Then in the second wave, we moved from this number to 65 municipalities and 308 communes, and we added the second tier of local governance, which were the 12 sharks. In 2014, we have the third wave of decentralization reforms, which brought to 61 municipalities and 12 sharks the second level local governance units in Albania. Actually, alongside this, the municipalities and shaping and reshaping, amalgamating, adding, removing, we have also some other processes which are going in parallel, but without any result. The one is related to the charts, which during all of this time did not change since they are broadly related to the electoral processes here in Albania. And we have the regional development policy, which also has set forth for development regions in the country. They are not administrative, but only with development purposes. Maybe it's not the case to stop in what made the package of reforms in Albania, but in all 3 waves that we have identified, the proposed package was almost the same. We have the territorial reorganization of the country, which underwent at the same time with other decentralization processes, like a national strategy for decentralization, a new law on how the local government would operate and will be organized, and other laws which have been amended. Actually, there have been a lot of critics from the second wave of decentralization, which led to a third wave of decentralization, and we had the amalgamation of about 373 units into 61 municipalities. Here, the policy making actually highlighted what Pavel and Sergei brought forward, that we would gain some cost efficiency, economies of scale, better access and higher quality of services, democratic and representative local government, but also a very, very, very strong and common denominator were the political reasons. And these together were the fundamentals of the new package of reforms, which marked the second momentum for decentralization in Albania. Actually, we are under discussion for a new territorial reform, which aims to bring the number of municipalities in the country to about 92 municipalities. At the current state, we have 2 tiers of subnational governments. We have 61 municipalities with mayors directly elected from the population. We have the second level of local governance units, which are sharks, but they have a rudimentary role. We have 4 regional development areas which do not have any administrative power but are only for development purposes, and this has been another reform going back and forth from the government. Municipalities in Albania are quite different in different aspects. The average population is 71,000 inhabitants, with a minimum of 5,000 in the municipality of Pustet and the maximum of more than 700 inhabitants in the municipality of Tirana. 10 municipalities represent more than 55% of all population, and despite these disparities among these municipalities, they have all the same functions. While with the TAR of 2014, fragmentation of municipalities somehow was addressed. Today, we are still discussing about the representativity, the efficiency in services delivery, and cost efficiency. In order to see what were the outcomes in terms of financial outcomes, here we have presented a chart which shows the overall revenues of municipalities over the last decade. Actually, in nominal terms, municipalities had more financial resources available to exert their to exercise their competencies and functions, but from a structural point of view, we can see that not very much has changed for municipalities. Actually, the component that was said to be the one empowering and driving municipal performance, own source revenues, still lags behind from a level of 25.6 in 2015. Own source revenues represent only 28.8% of total revenues of municipalities in Albania, which is not quite a very good result given all the reforms that we have undertaken. And here we must note that this 28.8% is made up only from revenues from 2 taxes, the infrastructure impact tax and the property taxes, both of which for 55% are collected in one municipality, the municipality of Tirana. About financial autonomy, we have used 3 indicators which are broadly used in literature to assess whether municipalities are financially autonomous or can somehow undertake independently investments on their own. And all 3 indicators suggest that despite all the reforms that we have undertaken, despite the tightening of fiscal policies from municipalities, despite new tax items added to municipalities, financial autonomy still remains quite low. And here at the municipal level, we can see that most of the municipalities remain below the national average, even in the wider concept of financial autonomy indicator. And to explain these results, we have used the OECD framework to see whether municipalities do or not have tax powers. We have put together the sources of revenues of Albanian municipalities and the tax powers of the municipalities. Actually, in Albania, municipalities have full autonomy and tax powers only on local fees and charges, while for the other elements or sources of finance, they do not have tax powers, even in local taxes, which usually are considered to be under the control of municipalities. If we go and dig deeper, we can see that the municipalities do not have any power to set the tax base, the tax rate. They can only make some ranges or subcategorizations, but they do not have tax powers to change any of these items. And the more we move to the left side of the screen, the less autonomy, the less taxing powers municipalities have. Similarly to revenues on the expenditure side, municipalities have increased their allocation of expenditures. But what has happened is that we still have a ratio that goes to 55% of total expenditures with unconditional or on-source funded expenditures, and 45% of them on conditional expenses. I just noticed before that it was a strong there is a strong push to amalgamation reforms driven by the idea that we could have some cost efficiency or administrative efficiency in undertaking this reform. Actually, in Albania, it has happened that the administration costs have increased over the time. In 2015, personal costs of Albanian municipalities accounted only for 90% of total expenses, while in 2021, this ratio has jumped to 26%. Which is far away from the objective that was posed from the TAR, which was to bring down costs personal costs. While investments still are a weak component of total expenses of municipalities in Albania. Since here in Albania, and I think all over the world, we do not have a reference of how many employees through the municipality have. We have used a benchmark of the World Bank from the UPP project, which states that each municipality must have a number of employees that ranges below 25 employees per 10,000 inhabitants. Applying this rule to Albania, we can see that only 7 municipalities stand below this benchmark, while all other municipalities are not overstaffed, let's say. Nevertheless, the personal cost and the number of employees in municipalities should be looked carefully and not judged a priori, because if we want to have better services, we cannot do it without people. But we should be clear and careful on the quality of the human resources that these municipalities employ. And if we want municipalities to thrive and develop, we should look for investments. Actually, this is the weakest component as suggested by the indicators presented in this chart. Local investments, on-source funded capital expenditures to GDP account only for 0.6% in 2021. This is the lowest level since 2010. And this is very disappointing and actually goes on the contrary to what is proposed and what is served to the general public when we undertake this kind of reforms. Here, I have put also a chart just to show that we have the infrastructure impact tax, which in the case of the municipality of Tirana accounts as 220% of total investments undertaken in year 2021. This ratio stands at about 29% in the case of all other municipalities, suggesting that we have created a huge gap between the largest municipality in Albania and all other 60 municipalities operating in the country. Actually, what we find or what we think is that these territorial, administrative, and governance reforms are broadly driven from political reasons. The importance of local governance has increased, but the performance is largely driven by one municipality and 2 taxes. Municipalities are very different between them and lack of financial and fiscal autonomy. And somehow this has created some opportunistic behavior from them, relying on central government funds. The time has shown that municipalities in Albania are very weak to respond to internal or external shocks, and usually in these cases, they turn their eyes to central government. What we suggest at the to policy making, actually, who are discussing for a new territorial reform, is that this reconfiguration should not be a separate event, and it would be good if this is strongly connected to another decentralization processes that are ongoing, like the revision of the national cross-cutting strategy for decentralization and local governance in the country. Probably we need to revise and maybe pilot some asymmetric decentralization in the country. It will be very difficult, even if we switch to 95 or 93 or 92 municipalities, to overcome the financial problems that characterize municipalities in Albania. Alongside empowering from a financial point of view municipalities, we need at the same time to strengthen monitoring, transparency, and accountability in the use of public money by municipalities. Well, this is all from Albania.
Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead, finish your.
No, it's fine. Should there be any questions?
Yeah. So I mean, I hate to interrupt this very thoughtful presentation, but we are really running short on time. So I would love to move to Caucasus. I want to have Armenia first, and then Georgia, and then hopefully we will have a little bit time. We are going to be over time, but Abraham Artesian is going to make the presentation on Armenia. Abraham is the coordinator for the community's finance officers and is going to talk to us about community consolidation in Armenia. Abraham.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be as short as possible. To start with the consolidation process in Armenia, I want to stress out the importance of pre-consolidation phase. So we start the discussion about the consolidation about in 2005, when we presented a report stating that there is no way for development if we still have very fragmented municipalities, and suggested some policy and options for amalgamation, which called them consolidation. And we offer two different strategies, one which will be creating the second layer of governments in Armenia, and the second one is to have a bigger municipality, but still it's based on the former regional structure that we have in Soviet Union. So in 2011, we created a concept for consolidation, and it was approved by the government of Armenia. I can say that it was a very important stage in the consolidation process, because before that, like 6-7 years, we are discussing the consolidation, but there is no political bill, and the approval of the concept of consolidation stated that the government accepted that there is no way for development rather than consolidation and creating larger municipalities in region of Armenia. So we are starting to creating these clusters, so to understand how the municipalities will look like and what big or small municipality should be created. And we have made a research and created 3 clusters for consolidation and approve these maps by the administrative territorial divisions. So the important step, I can say that it was a concept of consolidation that stated the critical criteria for the consolidation. It's almost 7 that say that there is some important aspect of consolidation should happen in order to have an efficient, newly created communities. And out of these 7, the 5 should be respected in order to be merged with other municipalities. Like if the municipality don't have a common border with neighbors, so it's not possible to create a new one or merge these 2 municipalities. By the way, we have a such case in Armenia when we don't have a common border and just we split some territories and give to another municipality to have this common, to create this common border and to create a new 4 municipalities. There was a 7 major criteria, and we have another 6 important principles like dimensions should be respected in order to have a consolidation process, and we take into consideration like economic visibility, accessibility of services, and availability of transportation to have a bigger impact out of consolidation in Armenia. So this was the first phase, and we have a solid research and solid development of the strategies for development and solid strategies for consolidation, and we choose 3 main approaches for consolidation. So in the first stage, we are trying to test which model is best fit to Armenian reality and which model can have a bigger economic or administrative impact out of consolidation. So we created economic approach. For the first case, we have a municipality of Datev, and it's 7 small settlements, small municipalities, but they have a huge potential for the tourism development, and through the private investment, there was created a tourist infrastructures, like we have rope, we have churches, and we have good roads and good geography and sightseeing. So we decided that there is an economic aspect of consolidation. We can just merge the decision making, the decision autonomies for decision making, and not go through the approving the same decision among those 7 municipalities, but to create a one consolidated municipality and one consolidated local governments in order to just bring more investment and facilitate the economic factor of development of that municipality. So I can say that the first incentive, it was the economic approach, and we are trying to use this economic development possibility in order to have a developed municipality. The second one was a cluster approach. We just name it a small location or small territory within particular area of Armenia, and try to understand which communities are geographically closer to each other and have some similarities, and create a small number of municipalities merge. So we expected that 7 or 8 municipalities that have some common infrastructure, for example, for this case is a road, to merge and have a not so big municipality. And the third one is a regional approach. It was based on the former administrative structure we are from Soviet Union, and by the way, it was thought that it was a most effective structure, administrative structure that can be used. But that time we was afraid that it's too similar to Soviet structure, and we don't want to somehow build the same attitude towards this consolidation. So we don't want the people think that we are going back to the Soviet Union. So we have the second phase, and here we have major changes, because during the first phase we have a consolidation, constitutional requirements that the amalgamation should happen after public referendum, and we actually organized and implemented this referendum where people were voting for or against the consolidation. I can say that the result of that referendum was not the same. Some municipalities were for amalgamation, some were against, and the votes were split almost 50-50. for and against amalgamation. And because this result of referendum is not taken into account by the government, and there is no legal requirement to take this result of referendum, the government decided that it's too much costly for the Armenia, and they decided that we don't need of this referendum and say, okay, we are not going to have any referendum anymore, and we just invite the people of communities and discuss this consolidation and try to understand both challenges they see and how we can overcome all that challenges. So in 2060, we have more 15 clusters, municipalities, and we have more 34 municipalities in 2017. And I can say that during the second and third phase, we have lowered down the participation of people voting for the consolidation, and more people had negative attitude toward this consolidation, because people are not aware how and why they are consolidated. In comparison with the first phase, when a lot of public discussion were held. Actually, we have a huge time that we put away this consolidation process because of the COVID and war in Nagorno-Karabakh, and so we have a revolution in Armenia, and we have a change in government and government attitude to the consolidation process, and we started this consolidation in 2020, but the decision was made after all these phases to the regional type of approach of consolidation. So in Armenia, the consolidation take to create a bigger municipality, where not 5 or 6 municipalities, but 40, 30 municipalities. So it became a bigger municipalities, which have the same, near the same border we have in Soviet Union. So it's the final decision was made toward the regional consolidation approach, and now we have 71 municipalities in Armenia. So, but the process is ongoing. We have some municipalities that are represented by the national minorities. It's mostly Yezdis, and we keep for the late date the consolidation, and now we are trying to solve this national minorities municipality. National minorities say that if they are consolidating the voice of nations, these people will become less heard, and they have see some threats about the nationality and culture, some differences, and they say that if we consolidate it, maybe we'll lose all this stuff. So both important changes I see out of this consolidation process is we make changes in election system, and previously we have a majoritarian system of election, and we changes to proportional system of election that make us available to have some quotas for gender and gender representativeness in election system, and we have now law that says law on elections that says that at least 30% should be represented by different genders, and I can say that now much more interesting from the council election that it was in previously. And the second good result out of consolidation is that we have some mobilization of capital budgets. It's, by the way, the question, we have in question and answer section. So previously the small municipalities have a small capital budgets, and they spend, like if we have $1,000 or $2,000 in the capital budget, so nothing can be done with that. And out of consolidation, we see that now municipalities have enough capital budgets to co-share some project with the national governments, and national governments give some money for that capital budgets. And you can see the figures that in 2016 we have 36% of capital expenditures in municipalities, and now it increased 3 times, which is good in terms of capital investment, but it's not good in terms of financial autonomy, because this capital investment are co-shared with the national government. The national government have full autonomy over this monitoring, evaluation, and somehow affecting decision making at the local level. So now we have some challenges and something to do for the next stage. And the first one is administrative and fiscal decentralization. And everybody before the consolidation process starts say that we are consolidating municipalities to transfer more responsibilities to municipalities. But what responsibilities, how these new taxes or new revenues for municipality will be created? Nobody understands yet. And we need to develop some documents. We need to develop infrastructures to have more connected with the municipalities and make a political decision about the political autonomy. That's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's move quickly to Georgia and to David. David Loza-Beritse is the chairman of Local Democracy Network, and he's going to make us a presentation of local government amalgamation in Georgia. David.
Okay. Thank you. I will try to speak briefly because time is limited, and I will try to present the current situation in the form of the thesis. Okay. So, oops. Oh, what's happened? So I will start with historical remarks. There was during Soviet period there was 2 levels of local governing as in different Soviet states. First level was self-government was local level, so-called local Soviets, approximately 1,000 self-governing units, and second level was Soviet rayons. It's approximately 64 districts under the control of modern Georgia. I exclude, don't include the Abkhazia and South Ossetia that were occupied by Russian Federation. During the discussion, all experts working in the field of self-governing argued that the highly fragmented system of self-government did not have sufficient resources, and everybody agreed that we need to something amalgamation, process of amalgamation. As a result of the 2005-2006 reform, the territorial organization of the self-government was fundamentally changed. Maybe many of you know that Georgians are characterized by the radicalism. We strive to better Catholics than Pope of Rome. So each reform, Georgians try to make in radical ways. And so the reform for amalgamation, territorial arrangement, completely abolished the first level of self-government instead of amalgamation of existing lowest level. As a result, self-government separated from the population, and some of the figures show this, some data show this about this. The level of citizen participation was been decreased because during 19th or previous century, there was many, some hundred of CBOs, community-based organizations, working with local government units, but absolute majority of them almost disappeared, and there are no local community organizations on local level because they have no longer a partner on the local level, local government. Amalgamation process was not accompanied by the transfer of finance and competencies. It was problematic for all wave of Georgian decentralization reform. And formal and informal control of the central government was maintained on the local level. In 2013-2014, new reform of decentralization was launched, and this reform aimed to split very large municipalities. There was different options between different expert groups, and from 100, 150, 200, 300 units. So reduce this 1,000 number to 3 or 200 units. And second aim was to transfer competencies as finances to the self-government. At the same time, consolidation process was stopped between contradiction between political groups, of even among the ruling party. As a compromise, on the first stage, 7 pilot municipalities, administrative centers of informal regions, historical regions, were selected on and they were divided into 2 districts, into 2 municipalities, into urban and rural units. Besides that, the process of transferring of competencies as finances to the self-government started. Unfortunately, since 2017, the process transferring competencies as financial resources has slowed down. Administrative territorial reform did not continue in 2017, and 14 new municipalities, divided 7 municipalities, were reunited again. Process of recentralization of services, public services, has begun, and for example, the creation of a centralized system of all electronic services is currently underway, even now, Georgia. As a reason from the side of government, inefficiency of was declared as a reason, main reason for stopping of reform. Actually, the reason of is a central desire to lose control over the seats. And by the way, which officials openly talked about during private conversation. So now some few data about some statistical data. If we look to this picture, we can see that local budgets are growing in the country from year to year. But this growth is mainly due not for growth of income base, but to change the methodology of transfer policy. For example, some part of transfers, 90% of VAT, was considered as a local income. You can see this orange line. But it means that that doesn't mean that it's increased, but now this transfer is declared as own same situation was before, but now it's recognized as a local own taxes, own income. So as to share of administrative cost, the share of administrative expenses in the budget of Georgia is the result of both of increasing own resources and relative regulation. For example, maximum number of municipal servants are determined by law, and municipal have no right to increase this number of public servants and spend more money, more resources for this. What about these 7 municipalities? It's quite difficult to say everything about this because of limited time, but generally no relevant studies have been conducted, unfortunately, but we have some official data to judge from them. In the target unit, as well as the whole country, amount of local budget depends not from them own revenues, but center transfers policy. You can see that this increasing since 2018, this number, but that doesn't mean that they really increase the local tax base. Only exception was 2015, 2017, when increasing of own resources was a result of improvement of internal management, because new municipalities try to manage better this entire system of management, including tax management. And this money increased from 35 total amount is increased from 35 to 75 million. This orange line shows this, the lines show this increase. So now about a few words about the reduction of administrative expenses. Unification of the pilot municipalities don't show decreasing the administrative expenses after 2018. It's same. So we cannot speak that amalgamation or reunification support to reducing administrative costs. As to the decrease of percentage share of budgets since 2016 is a result of increasing of consolidated total budgets. Now you can see this orange line. So what is this conclusion? First, increasing administrative expenses doesn't depend on the size of municipality, in Georgia at least, but it's a result of general financial policy. Amalgamation of the municipalities did not lead to decrease of this kind of expenses. And Pavel already mentions it, some data from the Nordic countries and even the countries of consolidated democracy have a same picture. In Georgia, in general, as in other hybrid regime countries, spending of funds increasing during election periods, when supporters of ruling party are rewarded with appointment of to municipal jobs, and it doesn't result of local policy. After amalgamation, quality of local democracy disturbed. Despite the mechanisms of engagement of citizens defined by Georgian legislation, Code of Local Self-Government, effectiveness in practice is very low. And this, according to all studies, including even ruling parties' thematic inquiry of the Parliament of Georgia. So, main reason of this is that this existing mechanism of engagement are only consultative, but not obligatory for local government. Because we have no time, I will forget about some. There are some data, especially it shows that this system changes in different countries, and know that since 19th, various some related of the split of districts, rayons have been something considered as a crazy idea of a small group of experts. But now we can read that many countries like Estonia or Latvia make same reform, and as our colleagues from Armenia, from Ukraine said, this is underway, this current reform of amalgamation, but not some so radical way. And a few words about perspective and recommendation. In Georgia, as in another country of Central and Eastern Europe, decentralization reform is like a wave, and different government promised, and they try to make some steps, but it's inefficient as a role. And now I believe that administrative territorial reform will again become the political agenda in Georgia, and it will be some same way in Georgia since Georgia restored its independence. And anyway, we can take into account some points when we speak about territorial arrangement. Interest of homogeneous areas or territorial interests of variable environment. For example, creation of new cities, new center for attraction. Cohesion policy, its possibilities development, possibilities to equal development, and creation tools for this development for different zones, because zones are quite different from each other. By the way, it's done as it's obligatory in accordance to the Georgian European Union Association Agreement. And third problem is the problem of the population rural areas. Since 1989, reduction of 50% of rural areas, the population of rural areas, but it doesn't mean that it's a process of urbanization, because urban areas have no possibilities to receive these people, and you can see that the population of Georgia reduced from since 1991 from 5.5 million and 3.5 million currently. So, and some words about perspectives. Maybe it's better to start a discussion about establish of two-level system of self-government. For protection of local units, it's first level of self-government and increasing democracy involvement, and second level for implementation of large programs and service providing. Because despite the existing LCGs, local governments are distanced from population or the higher level. They are too, even now, they are too small to implement some big infrastructure projects. And by the way, Georgia has a quite good historical heritage. Two-level system existed during the Democratic Republic of Georgia in 1918, 1921, before the Bolshevik. In this case, well known for us, both Lilliput and Brobdang-Gaganing arguments will be considered, and my vision and my wishes is that since there are no political will for decentralization in the country in the current situation, I'm sure that the next wave of decentralization reform will start maybe after some years, and before it's very good possibilities from academia, for international organization, catalyzes relevant discussion for these changes. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we are all out of time. We don't have much time for discussions, but I'm glad we had a robust discussion on the Q&A board, and we have answered all of the questions. So I thank all of the panelists, and I am asking the panelists, Pavel, Sergey, Merita, is it okay if we share your email address with the attendees so that if there are pending questions, people can send you an email to ask you? But this is a subject of great interest for everybody in the region. I think we should organize a session, a longer session specifically dedicated to this issue, and then we should discuss these issues more in detail. Several countries in the region are going through this, and we have just organized a closed-door discussion for the Prime Minister of Moldova. Moldova is going through this process, and I see that a lot of countries are interested. So thank you, all of you. And I think the debate hasn't concluded here. We'll continue discussions. Thank you all.